The gala was choking on the smell of influence and power, and Kalo Okoro was bored. He stood beside a towering ice sculpture of a soaring eagle, the Bello Industries emblem, a flute of untouched champagne in his hand. Men in starched white agbadas and women in shimmering gowns drifted past, their laughter glancing off the marble floors of the grand ballroom. This was the annual Bello Foundation Charity Gala, the crown jewel of Lakota City's philanthropic season. Kylo, founder of the rival Okoro Power, was the reluctant guest of honor. His fiancée Sade materialized at his side, a vision in emerald green. "The German investors are here," she murmured, her voice a low, strategic hum. "They're with the Minister for Energy. We need to go over." She subtly straightened the lapel on his simple dark suit, a tiny gesture of ownership. Kalo gave a curt nod. He despised these functions. They were inefficient, a decadent display of opulence that could be better used funding actual infrastructure. He saw the world as a system to be optimized. This event was a system designed for peacocking. Across the room, the host himself, Chief Makanjuola Bello, held court. A big man in flowing gold robes, he radiated a thick, syrupy charm. The chief caught Kalo's eye and raised his glass in a grand theatrical toast. Kalo ignored it, turning his focus to the stage where the night's charity case performance was about to begin. A young woman walked into the spotlight. She was maybe 17, dressed in plain jeans and a simple t-shirt. The teenager looked completely out of place, a stark black and white photo in a room saturated with color. The crowd quieted, a wave of polite pity washing over the tables. The girl Fola didn't seem to notice. She stood at the microphone, her posture ramrod straight, her gaze sweeping over the glittering assembly with an unnerving intensity. "They build glass towers to scrape the sky," she began, her voice low but carrying a sharp metallic edge, "and use the shade to hide the graves." A ripple of discomfort went through the audience. This wasn't the usual tale of hardship and gratitude. This was an indictment. Kalo barely listened. He tapped his thumb against his forefinger, running calculations in his head. Optimize influence vectors. The Germans. The minister. Exit strategy. Fola's voice rose, her hands starting to carve the air, shaping her words. They host a feast for a hungry city. Then serve you pictures of the food. Her words were fire, each line a sharpened spear aimed directly at the heart of the room. A flicker of detached admiration for her audacity sparked in the billionaire. A foolish but brave display. Then she gestured, a sharp, angry slash of her hand, and something glinted under the stage lights. Kalo's world stopped. It was a silver locket hanging from a simple leather cord around her neck. Not just any locket. A baobab tree, its branches intricately carved, its roots deep and tangled. It was one of a kind. He knew every single line on its surface. He had commissioned it himself nearly 2 decades ago. For Amina, the only woman he had ever loved. The woman who had vanished without a trace, taking his heart with her. His breath caught in his throat. The champagne flute slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor. A collective gasp went through the nearby tables. "Kalo?" Sade was at his side instantly, her hand on his arm. "Are you all right? Your face is white." She mistook his shock for a medical crisis, her smooth composure fracturing into public concern. It only drew more attention. He couldn't speak. His eyes were locked on the jewelry. A 0.001% probability variable has just executed. System crash imminent. Amina. He felt a sudden violent lurch, as if the entire ballroom had tilted on its axis. He stumbled, his hand shooting out to grip the edge of a nearby table to keep from falling. The ice sculpture of Bello's eagle seemed to mock him, its frozen eyes staring blankly. Across the room, Chief Bello's warm, philanthropic smile had vanished. He watched Kalo's complete loss of composure, his eyes narrowed into cold, calculating slits. A flicker of something dark and triumphant passed over his face before being smoothed away. The young performer finished her poem to a scattered, uncertain applause. She walked off the stage, oblivious to the personal earthquake she had just triggered in the most powerful man in the room. "I need some air," Kalo said, his voice a raw rasp he barely recognized as his own. He pulled away from his fiancée, his movements stiff and jerky. He pushed through the gawking crowd, ignoring the whispers and concerned looks. He didn't stop until he was in a quiet, empty corridor, the muffled sound of the party a distant hum. He leaned against the cool wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. The baobab tree. Our roots run deep. That was the inscription on the inside. His secret promise to her. It couldn't be. A copy. A coincidence. It had to be. But his mind, the cold, logical machine he trusted above all else, was screaming at him. There were no copies. He had destroyed the mold himself. He straightened up, his face a mask of iron. The boredom was gone, replaced by a terrifying, all-consuming urgency. He pulled out his phone, his thumb tapping the screen with sharp, precise movements. He found the contact and pressed call. His head of security, Tunde, answered on the first ring. "Sir?" Kalo walked towards the exit, his strides long and purposeful, leaving the glittering affair and his stunned fiancée behind without a second glance. His voice was low, tight, and stripped of all emotion. "Tunde, the girl on the stage. I don't care what it costs. I want to know everything." The next 48 hours were a blur of cold data. Tunde's reports arrived in sterile, encrypted files. Fola, age 17, no known surname, resident of the Dawn's Promise orphanage since infancy, admitted as a newborn, found abandoned at the gates, found with one item, a silver locket shaped like a baobab tree. The words on the screen confirmed a reality Kalo's mind refused to accept. He stared at the picture of the locket from the orphanage intake file, a grainy black and white image that screamed with color in his memory. It was the same one. There was no doubt. Impatience, a raw and unfamiliar emotion, clawed at him. Tunde's methodical approach was too slow. Kalo needed to see her. He needed to stand in the same room, to breathe the same air, to verify the impossible information with his own eyes. He drove himself. The sleek, silent electric car, a product of his own company, felt alien as it navigated the chaotic, potholed streets leading to the orphanage. He left the air-conditioned world of Lakota City's elite island enclave and plunged into the sprawling, dusty mainland. Dawn's Promise was a modest two-story building painted a pale, sun-faded yellow. It was clean, the ground swept, but it sagged under the weight of years of too little funding. Kalo got out of the car, his $1,000 suit a glaring absurdity in this environment. He had called ahead, of course. A representative from Okoro Power was coming to discuss a potential endowment. A lie, a clumsy, brutish use of his power. The matron met him at the door. She was a stern-faced woman in her late 50s, her eyes sharp and assessing. She introduced herself as Mrs. Adebayo, and her handshake was firm, her gaze unwavering. She was not impressed by his name or his wealth. "Mr. Okoro," she said, her voice polite but cool. "Thank you for coming. We are always grateful for potential benefactors." She led him into a small, sparsely furnished office. The air smelled of antiseptic and old books. He felt a strange sense of powerlessness. In his world, he spoke and reality reordered itself. Here, his name meant nothing more than a possible check. "I was impressed by the performance of one of your children at the Bello Foundation Gala," he began, his voice sounding hollow and rehearsed. "Fola." The matron's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Fola is a very gifted girl. I'd like to fund a program. For the arts. Perhaps a scholarship," he improvised, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. "I would like to speak with her. To understand her needs. Our children's needs are many, Mr. Okoro," the matron replied, her eyes like chips of flint. "A new roof, updated plumbing, books. Fola's needs are the same as everyone else's." The message was clear. She was not for sale. The office door creaked open and the girl herself entered, carrying a stack of books. She stopped dead when she saw him. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of recognition before hardening into suspicion. She looked from Kalo's expensive suit to the matron's guarded face. "Fola, Mrs. Adebayo said gently. This is Mr. Kalo Okoro. He is interested in supporting the orphanage." The teen said nothing. She just stared at him, her gaze so direct it felt like a physical weight. He could see Amina in the sharp line of her jaw, in the stubborn set of her mouth. The sight made his chest ache. "I enjoyed your poem," he said, the words inadequate. "It wasn't for you," she replied, her voice flat. She placed the books on the matron's desk, her movements precise. Her eyes flickered down to his hands, then back to his face. She was analyzing him, dissecting him, just as he had dissected Tunde's reports. The air in the small office was thick with unspoken things. He felt a desperate urge to reach out, to ask about the necklace, to shatter the fragile piece of this place with his impossible truth. But the matron's protective presence was a fortress, and Fola's own guardedness was a wall of stone. He was failing. His wealth was a blunt instrument here, crude and useless. He was a systems engineer facing a problem with no logical inputs. He stood up, the visit a clear disaster. "Thank you for your time, Mrs. Adebayo. My office will be in touch about the donation." It was a retreat. As he turned to leave, defeated, Fola spoke again. Her voice was quiet but cut through the tension like a shard of glass. "You keep staring at my locket." Kalo froze, his back to her. He could feel her eyes on him and the matron's. He slowly turned around. The girl's hand was at her throat, her fingers protectively covering the silver baobab tree. "The matrons say my mother left it for me," she said, her gaze unwavering, challenging. The words landed like a physical blow, each one a nail driving home the truth he was terrified to confront. She took a small step forward, her expression a mixture of defiance and a deep ancient hurt. "They say she was a journalist, someone who fought powerful men." The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but absolute. He felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just a girl with his lost lover's necklace. This was a young woman who knew a piece of the story, a dangerous piece. He had no response. Kylo gave a stiff, jerky nod and walked out of the office, out of the orphanage, the girl's words echoing in his head. He got into his car, the silence of the luxury vehicle a roaring vacuum. He had come here for confirmation and had found a complication he could never have predicted. His phone buzzed. It was Tunda. Kalo answered, his hand unsteady. "Sir, I have something." Tunda's voice was urgent. "It's a long shot, but I cross-referenced the orphanage's founding date with Amina's known activities. Her last project, the one she was working on when she vanished." Kalo gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. It was an exposé on Bello Oil. The name landed like a lit match on dry tinder. Bello Oil, Chief Mac Bello, the man who had smiled at Kalo's breakdown at the gala, the man whose foundation ran the orphanage where his daughter, had lived her entire life. Coincidence was no longer a variable. This was a design. Kalo's world narrowed to a single burning point of focus. The next day, Tunde's team unearthed another ghost from the machine. It was a digital fragment pulled from a corrupted hard drive recovered from Amina's old apartment years ago, now finally decrypted. An unsent email draft addressed to him. "Kay, I'm worried. This Bello story is bigger than I thought, more dangerous. But I'm also worried about you. About us. You're so focused on the company, on building your empire. I feel like you're drifting away. Like you're losing the man I fell in love with. Don't let the machine you're building consume your soul." The words were 17 years old, but they hit him with the force of a physical blow. He read them again and again. It was a cry for help he had never received. A fresh, sharp guilt twisted in his gut. He had been building his empire, just as she'd said. He had been so obsessed with his work that he had missed the real danger she was in. Was his own ambition part of the reason she was gone? The thought was a venomous poison seeping into the cracks of his carefully constructed world. He shoved the feeling down. Guilt was an unproductive emotion. What he needed was leverage. He arranged the meeting. Not in an office, but at the Lagosian Club, a bastion of old money and cigar smoke where Bello held court every Thursday. It was enemy territory. Kylo walked in, his simple dark suit a stark contrast to the rich brocades and gold jewelry favored by the club's members. The chief was seated in a high-backed leather chair, a glass of expensive brandy in his hand. He saw Kalo approach and his lips curved into a warm paternal smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Kalo, my boy, what a surprise. Come, join me." He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. The tech mogul sat. The air between them was thick with unspoken history. "Chief Bello," Kalo said, his voice level, "I've been thinking about your foundation. A remarkable enterprise." "One does what one can," Bello said, taking a slow sip of his brandy. He swirled the amber liquid, watching it coat the glass. "It is our duty to care for the less fortunate, the forgotten." He placed a subtle emphasis on the last word, a clear, deliberate jab. "I visited one of your orphanages," Kalo continued, his gaze locked on Bello's. "Dawn's Promise. They have a very talented young poet there." The older man's smile widened, but his eyes were like chips of ice. "Ah, yes, the girl from the gala. A fiery spirit. A shame, what happens to some people, left with nothing but a story." He slowly, deliberately polished his heavy gold signet ring with his thumb, a gesture of dominance. "The stories people leave behind can be Powerful, Kalo countered, his voice dropping. I was a great admirer of the journalist Amina. I followed her work closely, especially her last investigation into the oil sector. The air crackled. The game was on the table. Bello stopped polishing his ring. He leaned forward, his massive frame seeming to suck the air out of the space between them. His voice was a low, confidential growl. Amina was a brilliant woman, but reckless. A shame. You must learn, my boy, that some fires are best left to burn out on their own. Trying to stir old embers, you can get burned. The threat was unmistakable, wrapped in a thin veneer of friendly advice. Kalo felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The chief knew. He knew everything. This entire situation, Fola in that orphanage, her appearance at the gala, it was all a message, a twisted 17-year-long power play. Kalo left the club, the scent of cigar smoke clinging to him like a shroud. The confrontation had yielded nothing but a confirmation of his worst fears. Bello was not just a suspect, he was the architect. He returned to his penthouse apartment late that night to find Sade waiting for him. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silhouette against the glittering lights of Lakota City. She didn't turn as he entered. I had lunch with my father today, she said, her voice cool and clipped. She was wearing a sharp architectural dress, her posture rigid. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. He mentioned you were asking questions about Chief Bello. It's a business matter, Kalo lied. Sade took a step closer. She was not emotional, not angry. She was assessing a liability. My father is the Minister of Finance. Chief Bello is one of his oldest and most powerful allies. Their families go back generations. Bello's company has funded my father's campaigns for 20 years. She let the words hang in the air. This has nothing to do with you or your father, he said, his jaw tight. Everything has to do with us, she countered, her voice sharp as glass. Our engagement is a merger, an alliance. You are a variable I am supposed to control. My father says to stop whatever you are doing. He says this is not a business dispute you can win. She straightened a coaster on the marble table, a tiny subconscious act of imposing order on the chaos he was creating. Kalo stared at her. He saw the political machine laid bare. He wasn't just up against Bello. He was up against the entire corrupt system that the man represented, a system his future father-in-law was a part of. He was trapped. Sade looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Whatever this is, Kalo, let it go. For the good of the alliance. For your own good. He turned away from her, walking towards the window, the city lights a dizzying blur below. He felt caged, surrounded by enemies on all sides, the weight of his own past guilt, the impossible truth of his daughter, the political danger. It was a perfect trap. He thought of Fola's defiant face. He thought of Amina's last email. He thought of Bello's smug, triumphant smile. Letting it go was not an option. It was never an option. He remembered the chief's parting words at the club, the final chilling threat that now echoed in the silent penthouse, not as a warning but as a promise. A man must be careful what ghosts he digs up, Kalo. Sometimes they bury you. The walls were closing in. Kalo's fiancée saw him as a liability. Chief Bello saw him as a nuisance to be swatted. He was isolated, his usual methods of money and influence rendered useless against a deeply entrenched system of political patronage. He had data, he had suspicion, but he had no weapon. Meanwhile, Fola felt like a pawn. The strange, intense billionaire had crashed into her life, kicking up dust and asking questions that had no answers. The visit had left her unsettled, the quiet order of her world fractured. She felt a new, terrifying vulnerability. For 17 years, she had been invisible. Now powerful men were looking at her. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She fought back with words. In the orphanage's small, outdated computer room, she sat before a flickering monitor. She created an anonymous account on a video-sharing platform. She set up a cheap webcam, draped a black cloth behind her to obscure the background, and pressed record. She didn't look at the camera. She looked inward to the anger and confusion churning inside her. She spoke. The poem was called Silver Locket. It was a raw, blistering piece about a ghost mother, a baobab tree, and a rich man who comes searching for a history he never tried to own. It was about a girl who was a secret, now being treated like a problem to be solved. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. The emotion was so pure, so potent, it was undeniable. She uploaded it and walked away, a small measure of control reclaimed. The video detonated online. Within a day, it had thousands of views across Lakota City. People shared it with captions like, "Listen to this," and "The truth hurts." The anonymity only fueled the speculation. It became a viral sensation, a voice for the city's disenfranchised. Kylo saw it on a secure tablet in his office. He watched it once, then again, his face impassive. A storm of pride and terror churned in his gut. This was Amina's fire, her courage, her soul staring back at him through the eyes of her daughter. But it was also a massive, uncontrolled risk. She was making herself a target. But the video did what his wealth and power could not. It broke through the wall of fear. 2 days later, Tunde received an encrypted message from an untraceable source. "I was her editor. I have to talk." The meeting took place at a noisy bus station, the air thick with exhaust fumes. Amina's former editor, a man named Bayo, was a shadow of his former self. He was thin, his eyes darting nervously, his hands trembling as he clutched a worn satchel. He had been living in hiding for over a decade. "I saw the video," Bayo whispered, his voice hoarse. "That girl, her words, it was like hearing Amina again. I can't live with the guilt anymore." "What happened?" Kalo asked, his voice low and urgent. "Amina had a source," Bayo explained, his words tumbling out. "A man inside Bello Oil's finance department. His name was Joseph. He had proof of everything: illegal dumping, bribery, intimidation. Bello was poisoning entire villages and paying officials to look the other way." He felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Joseph got scared. He knew Bello was ruthless. He was murdered a week before Amina disappeared. They made it look like a robbery. Amina knew she was next. She was terrified not for herself but for her baby. Bayo's voice broke. She knew she was pregnant. The words confirmed Kalo's darkest suspicion. "She told me she was creating an insurance policy," Bayo continued, his hands shaking as he opened his satchel. "She gave a copy to Joseph's family, a memory card. She said if anything happened to her, they should get it out of the country." He pulled out a small sealed envelope. "They were too scared. They gave it to me after she vanished. I've held on to it all these years." Kalo took the envelope. "It was surprisingly light. Bello's men came for me a week later," Bayo said, his eyes wide with remembered terror. "They warned me to forget everything, to destroy all of Amina's files. I ran. I've been running ever since." He returned to his office, the small memory card feeling heavier than a bar of gold in his hand. He plugged it into a secure terminal. It was a digital ghost, a treasure trove of pure, undeniable fact. There were scanned bank statements showing massive illegal payments to government officials, geotagged photographs of tanker trucks dumping toxic sludge into a river under the cover of darkness, internal memos signed by Bello himself, authorizing aggressive negotiations with local community leaders who complained. And then he found the final folder. It was labeled Insurance. Inside was a single video file. He clicked play. The face of a nervous, middle-aged man, Joseph, filled the screen. It was a recorded deposition. He spoke calmly, detailing every crime he had witnessed, every bribe he had processed. He named names, dates, and amounts. The video ended and Kalo found a final document. It was a signed affidavit from Joseph, dated just 48 hours before Amina vanished. It was a sworn legal testimony of everything in the video. At the bottom was a handwritten note from Amina. "Kay, if you are reading this, it means I couldn't win. Don't let him erase me. Don't let him win." He finally understood. The chief hadn't just made her disappear. He had tried to erase her very existence. He had stolen his lover, his daughter, and his past. Kylo stood up, the cold, calculating part of his mind taking over completely. He had the weapon. Now he needed to choose the battlefield. Not a courtroom. Not a boardroom. It had to be public. It had to be total. An annihilation. He picked up his phone, his thumb steady as it navigated to his contacts. He made a call. "Tunde, I need 2 tickets for the Lakota Energy Summit next week. Front row. One for me." He paused, a cold, predatory smile touching his lips for the first time in days. "And 1 press pass. For Fola." The Lakota Energy Summit was the apex of corporate power. The main hall was a sea of dark suits and political influence, the air humming with quiet billion-dollar deals. At the head table sat the nation's elite, Kylo Okoro. His fiancée Sade, cool and composed beside him. And at the center, beaming under the lights, Chief Makanjuola Bello. Tonight was his coronation. He was receiving the summit's Lifetime Achievement Award for his contributions to the nation's energy sector. Fola sat in the press section. The pass Kalo had sent her hanging around her neck like a lead weight. She felt like a trespasser, a ghost at the feast. He had sent only a single cryptic message with the ticket. Your mother was a journalist. Tonight you can help finish her work. Watch the main screens. She didn't understand, but a strange electric current of anticipation ran through her. A slickly produced tribute video began to play on the massive screens flanking the stage. It showed a smiling Chief Bello shaking hands with presidents, cutting ribbons at new facilities, and hugging children at the Dawn's Promise orphanage. The irony was a physical sickness in her stomach. The Minister for Energy was at the podium, his voice booming. A titan of industry, a pillar of our community, a man whose generosity knows no bounds. It is my honor to present this award to my dear friend, Chief Bello. The hall erupted in thunderous applause. Bello rose, spreading his arms wide to accept the adulation. He walked to the podium, his face a mask of humble gratitude. He was at the absolute summit of his power. And then the world broke. The tribute video on the screens behind him flickered. It went black for a single heart-stopping second. Then a new image appeared. Not Bello smiling, but a scanned bank statement. A massive transfer from a Bello Industries subsidiary to a private account owned by a government official. The applause sputtered and died. A confused murmur rippled through the hall. The chief's smile froze on his face. He stared at the screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. Another image flashed up. A geotagged photograph. A Bello oil tanker, its license plate clearly visible, dumping a black viscous sludge into a moonlit river. Then another, and another. The poisoned water, the dead fish, the devastated landscape. The silence in the hall was now absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Bello's head whipped around, his eyes scanning the crowd, searching for the source of the attack. His gaze landed on Kalo. The younger man met his stare, his expression as cold and unforgiving as a block of ice. The screens changed again. Now it was Joseph's face, pale and terrified, speaking from beyond the grave. His recorded deposition played, his voice echoing through the silent hall, detailing every crime, every bribe, every act of intimidation. Chief Bello himself gave the orders. Joseph's voice declared, clear as a bell. Panic began to set in. People were standing up, whispering frantically into their phones. Security guards started moving towards the stage, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. Bello grabbed the microphone, his knuckles white. Lies. This is a technical malfunction. A corporate sabotage, he roared, his voice trembling with fury. But it was too late. The final image filled the screens. Joseph signed and dated affidavit, clear for all to see. A legal dagger in the heart of his empire. The demolition was complete. The data had done its work. But the final killing blow was yet to come. In the ensuing chaos, a figure detached from the press section. Fola. She walked with a calm, deliberate purpose towards a small secondary podium set up for media questions. No one stopped her. All eyes were on the implosion happening on the main stage. She reached the microphone. She didn't shout. Her voice was quiet but carried by the sound system. It cut through the noise like a razor. My name is Fola, she said. The hall fell silent again, all heads turning towards her. I grew up in the Dawn's Promise orphanage, she continued, her eyes fixed on Chief Bello. The one you saw in the video, the one that a great philanthropist built his name on. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. I have a silver locket. It was left for me by my mother, a journalist who investigated powerful men, a journalist who disappeared 17 years ago. She didn't need to say anything else. Her story, her presence, her quiet dignity, it was the human truth that gave the data on the screens its soul. She was the living, breathing consequence of the crimes displayed behind her. Chief Bello stared at her, his face a horrifying mask of rage and defeat. He had been ruined, not just by his rival's technology, but by the quiet, powerful voice of the girl he had kept as a pawn for nearly 2 decades. The symbol of his charity had become the undeniable proof of his evil. It was perfect poetic justice. Weeks later, the city was still reeling from the scandal. Kalo and Fola sat at a simple roadside stall, the smell of grilling suya and the noise of traffic all around them. The silence between them was vast and awkward, a 17-year chasm. They were a father and a daughter who were complete strangers. He cleared his throat. He gestured towards the baobab locket at her neck. She would be so proud, he he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Fola didn't respond immediately. She watched the cars go by, her expression unreadable. She took a piece of fufu, dipped it in the soup, and ate it slowly. The silence stretched, filled with all the things they couldn't say. Finally, she turned to look at him, her eyes clear and direct. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet, cautious curiosity. What was her favorite color? The question hung in the air, simple and profound. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. It was a single, fragile thread thrown across the abyss between them. It was a beginning.